We would like to welcome you to the Odra, Cooking, and Fine Wines channel. If you have been looking for information on how to make your own whole wheat bread and other breads as well, we have our top 4 videos that we have researched and want to present to you. But first off, there are links at the bottom in the description of this video that will take you to the page that you see here, if you are looking for fantastic selections of bread makers on Amazon. Just briefly take a look here as we scroll. Also, there are links below in the video description that will take you to the page that you see here, if you are looking for the Amazon Whole Foods and groceries from Amazon as well. Just briefly take a look here as we briefly scroll as well. Also, be sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button for us as well. But now, let's get to our selection of videos that we have researched for how to make your own whole wheat bread and other breads as well. Video number 1 is from the Regular Chef YouTube channel. Video number 2 is from the Caceres YouTube channel. Video number 3 is from the Regular Chef YouTube channel. Video number 4 is from the Six Sisters Stuff YouTube channel. Video
Why would you buy bread at the store when you can just
Chef
make it yourself?
YouTube channel.
And it's actually not too hard. So today, we're gonna do that. Let's get into it.
If you're new here, my name is Charlie, and on this channel I show you how to make delicious food using simple ingredients and techniques so that you can become a more confident home cook. So let's make some bread. And we're going to start off here by mixing the dough. Of course, you'll need whole wheat flour, and then you'll also need some sort of white flour. I'd recommend bread flour because it contains more gluten than all-purpose, so it gives the bread a nicer chew, but I have made this bread with all-purpose flour and it still works out fine that way too. So just use whatever you have, but in this case I'm using bread flour. So in the bowl of a stand mixer, combine 165 grams of whole wheat flour with 255 grams of your bread flour or all-purpose flour. And of course you don't need to use a stand mixer, but it just makes it a bit easier. Now add 270 grams of warm water, preferably at around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 38 degrees Celsius. This recipe will make 1 loaf, so of course feel free to scale the recipe to make more loaves. Then, optionally, you can let your dough auto-lease, or in other words, rest for about 30 minutes to allow the starches in the flour to break down as the gluten starts to develop. You don't have to do this, but it does help a lot with the gluten development process, so I'd highly recommend it, especially if you're using all-purpose flour. So I like to do this in my proofing box, which I can keep at about 85 degrees Fahrenheit or 29 degrees Celsius, but you can also simulate this warm environment by placing your dough into the oven with the light on. Anyways, after that 30-minute auto-lease, my dough is already looking a lot more extensible, and it's time to add the next ingredients. So add 4 grams of instant yeast, along with 32 grams of honey, 36 grams of brown sugar, and 10 grams of salt. Then, either using a mixing spoon or your stand mixer, stir the dough until all of the ingredients are fully incorporated. We're using a relatively small amount of yeast here, which will allow the dough to rise a bit slower so it develops even more flavor as it rises. So once the dough is fully mixed, continue to knead using the dough hook attachment on your stand mixer for about 10 more minutes. This is where the majority of the gluten is going to develop in the dough, so this step is very important. And as always, you can also knead by hand if you prefer. Either way, you're looking for the dough to form a nice smooth ball. In the meantime, get out 3 tablespoons or 42 grams of unsalted butter and heat it up just slightly to soften it. Once we add the butter, it'll hinder the gluten development, so that's why we're going to add it after the kneading. So after your 10 minutes of kneading, go ahead and add the butter a little bit at a time and continue to mix for another 5 minutes. As you can see, I like my butter cut up into little cubes to help it incorporate easier. This butter is going to add a lot of nice richness and flavor to the bread. You may need to crank up the speed on your stand mixer and scrape down the sides of the bowl every now and then, but it'll mix in eventually. Now after that 5 minutes, we're finally done mixing and it's time for the initial rise. So just form your dough into a ball and cover up your bowl, then allow the dough to rise until doubled in size, which should take about 45 minutes to an hour in your warm environment. Like I mentioned before, slowing down the rise will also help the dough to develop more flavor, so feel free to let it rise at a cooler temp if you want to slow down the rise. Either way, once the dough has doubled in size, just remove it from your warm environment and punch it down to degas it a bit, then it's time for the final shaping. So start by dusting your surface with a light coating of flour, then turn your dough out onto the surface. Make sure to leave the top side of the dough unfloured because we'll need it to stick to itself during the shaping process. I like to drop some more flour around the perimeter of the dough like so, then work it underneath using a metal bench scraper just to make sure the dough doesn't stick to the work surface. For the actual shaping, start by working your dough out into a wide rectangle like so. Then fold the portion of the dough closest to you over the middle, then fold the left and right sides over each other in the same way. Finally, grab the 2 corners furthest away from you and fold them over, then tuck to develop a bit of tension. Then fold it over again and tuck and fold and tuck until you've reached the end of the loaf. Just fold the edges underneath like so to round it out, and make sure to pop any large bubbles that form on the surface. Finally, I like to just drag the loaf along my work surface a few times to develop a bit more tension and make sure the seams at the bottom are completely closed. Then it's time to transfer the dough to your loaf pan for the final rise. So get out a greased 9x5 loaf pan and drop the loaf in, making sure to keep the top side of the loaf facing up. Then just spray the top of the loaf with some more oil and cover your pan with plastic wrap. Allow the loaf to rise in your warm environment until it completely fills the pan, which should take about 45 minutes to an hour. When your dough looks like it's almost ready, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 180 degrees Celsius. At this point, you can also prepare an egg wash to brush onto your loaf before baking, which just consists of 1 egg beat together with about 1 teaspoon of water. Now, once the loaf is risen to your liking, just remove the plastic wrap and brush it with your egg wash mixture, which will give the bread a nice shine and help it to develop its golden brown color. Then I like to sprinkle the loaf with some kosher salt for a bit of extra flavor, and optionally you can also sprinkle it with some rolled oats. Just make sure to drop them all over your counter as you do it. But seriously, there's a reason to drop them from this high up because it actually helps to distribute the oats more evenly over the loaf. And the same principle applies when you're salting your dishes, so that's why you always see chefs sprinkling salt from high up. It's not just because it looks cool, it actually helps to get a more even distribution. Anyways, once that's done, just transfer your loaf to your 350 degree oven for about 25 to 30 minutes until it's reached your desired golden brown color. Now it's not quite done yet, but at this point you'll just want to tent the loaf with a bit of foil to prevent any further browning. Then return the loaf to your oven for another 15 minutes to let the inside finish cooking. Then once it's done, you can remove your loaf to a wire rack to allow it to cool. And as always, when you bake bread, you'll want to wait at least half an hour before you cut into it because the inside is still finishing cooking as it cools. So there's your beautiful, tender, and slightly sweet honey wheat sandwich bread. So now that you know how to make it, if you want to learn how to make some sourdough bread, be sure to click the video on the bottom right corner of the screen. So there you go. I'll see you all in the next one.
Good morning, I'm Echo, and today I'm going to show you how to make a homemade rustic whole wheat bread. Limit your trip to the bakery and the supermarket by learning to bake bread in the comfort of your own kitchen. My homemade rustic whole wheat bread recipe requires only 6 ingredients. With my easy-to-follow baking procedure, you'll have a freshly home-baked bread anytime for you and your loved ones. The perfect combination of butter spread on this crusty and aromatic whole wheat bread will satisfy your cravings for a great bakery-style bread. Let's get over to the ingredients so we can get started. Good morning, I'm Echo and welcome to Echo's Kitchen. For the ingredients, we'll need 2 cups of whole wheat flour, 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 1/2 teaspoon of dry active yeast, 2 tablespoons of honey, 2 teaspoons of salt, and 1 1/4 cups of warm water. Combine the honey and water. Stir and set aside. In a bowl, add the all-purpose flour, the whole wheat flour, salt and yeast. Whisk the dry ingredients together. Pour half of the water mixture into the dry ingredients and stir. The dough will slowly form. Add a little bit more water and continue to mix. If the dough is still dry, add the remaining water mixture. If the dough seems very sticky, add a little bit of wheat flour. Mix again, and when you've achieved the correct consistency, use a spatula to form a ball. Cover the dough with plastic wrap and a clean kitchen towel. Let it rest for 18 to 24 hours at room temperature. The dough is ready when it has doubled in size. The texture of the dough will look like this. Transfer the dough onto a floured workspace. Lightly flour the dough. I like to use a combination of both all-purpose flour and wheat flour. Begin to knead and knock the air out of the dough. Be sure to flour your hands to stop the dough from sticking to your fingers. After kneading for about 5 minutes, form the dough into a ball. Prepare a clean bowl and place a clean kitchen towel onto it. Flour generously and then transfer the dough onto it. Lightly flour the top surface of the dough. Cover the dough and let it proof for 1 hour. Once the dough has doubled in size, carefully transfer it in a floured baking tray. I like to proof my dough using this method because the bowl helps form the dough into a perfect round shape, and the kitchen towel adds a rough texture to the dough. Use a sharp knife and score the top of the dough. Before baking, place an oven-proof pot in the lowest level of the oven. Preheat the oven at 200 degrees Celsius. Place the baking tray in the middle level of the oven and quickly pour 2 cups of water into the pot, then immediately close the oven. I learned that by doing this, the steam clings to the surface of the dough and it keeps the bread moist. Baking time is about 40 to 50 minutes. Once the bread has formed a crisp golden crust, the bread is ready. Transfer the bread to a wire rack to cool before slicing. This bread is also great for making sandwiches. Stay tuned on my next vlog updates to learn how to make a homemade Philly cheesesteak sandwich with a homemade whole wheat bread. You can store this rustic bread in an airtight container for up to 3 days. You can also make a bunch because this bread freezes very well. Grab your spreadable butter and as always, enjoy! Thank you for watching. Please like and share this video. I will post more cooking vlogs every week, so I hope you will share my Facebook page to your friends, and please consider to subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!
Video
While
number
it's
3 is
definitely
from
harder to
the
achieve a
Regular
high
Chef
rise on a
YouTube
loaf of
channel.
whole wheat bread, that doesn't mean it always has to be dense and bland. Since whole wheat flour contains the entire grain, it has more trouble developing gluten since only certain parts of that grain contribute to gluten development. On top of that, those other parts of the grain act as little razor blades that slash apart the gluten network as it develops. But by making a few tweaks, including increasing the hydration to make the dough more extensible, we're able to achieve a relatively light and delicious loaf of whole wheat sourdough bread. And today I'm going to show you how to make it. So let's get into it. If you're new here, my name is Charlie, and on this channel I show you how to make delicious food using simple ingredients and techniques. So let's make some bread.
Also, before we get into the recipe, just a quick reminder that I've created a free sourdough quick start guide that walks you through everything you need to know in order to bake a successful loaf of sourdough bread. So to download it, be sure to click the link in the description below. So for this recipe, which makes 2 loaves, we'll need 140 grams of levain. To make the levain, mix 25 grams of your mature starter with 65 grams of flour and 65 grams of room temperature water. I'm just using my usual blend of 50% whole wheat and 50% all-purpose flour here, but if you want to make this recipe using entirely whole wheat flour, you can of course use whole wheat flour for the levain as well. It's really just up to you. Either way, just let that rise until at least doubled in size, which should take about 8 to 12 hours. As usual, I'll include a sample baking schedule on the full post on my website, which will be linked below, but generally I like to mix my levain at night and begin mixing the dough the next morning. So here we are about 10 hours later, and my levain has risen nicely, so we can start mixing the dough. In a large bowl, add 575 grams of water along with 140 grams of your levain, which should be just about the entire thing, then stir to dissolve. Keep in mind you can of course scale this recipe by just scaling all of the ingredients, including the levain, accordingly. Now add 650 grams of whole wheat flour and stir until everything is fully saturated. In this case, I'm using a finely ground whole wheat flour from Central Milling, which I'll link below for anyone interested. This recipe is also great for incorporating some other types of grains like einkorn, spelt, or rye. So if you want to do that, just replace 175 grams of the whole wheat flour with 175 grams of the flour of your choice. And you'll also want to use 50 grams less water in that case, so you should use 525 grams of water in the previous step rather than 575 grams. If you do incorporate other types of flours, I don't recommend using more than 175 grams for this recipe because those other types of grains contain less gluten than typical wheat, so you'll have to start changing the process more significantly as you add more and more of them. So you'll notice that if you do use them, your dough will have a bit less gluten development than mine does, but the final result should turn out just as well. Anyways, once everything is mixed, just cover your bowl and transfer it to a warm environment at about 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius and allow it to rest for an hour. This autolyse is a bit longer than usual because the whole wheat flour takes longer to absorb the water and start developing gluten. Anyways, after that hour, it's time to add 14 grams of salt along with another 30 grams of water and fold those into the dough. This brings the total hydration of the dough to about 93%, which is pretty high, but you do need to use a high hydration with whole wheat doughs just because that whole wheat flour can absorb so much water. If you use too low of a hydration, your dough won't be extensible enough and you'll end up with a tight and overly dense crumb. So at first it may seem like the dough will never come together, but throughout the course of the bulk fermentation, the folds will help us to develop plenty of strength in the dough. Anyways, for now, just return the dough to your 80-degree environment and let it rest for another 25 minutes. Now during the bulk fermentation, we're going to perform 6 sets of folds spaced out at 25-minute intervals. The first 4 sets will be stretch and folds, where you'll grab a portion of the dough and stretch it as far as it'll go without tearing, then fold it back over itself, and repeat that process 8 times around the perimeter of the dough. Then after the 4th set of folds, you'll flip the dough over before placing it back into your warm environment. The last 2 sets of folds will be coil folds, so for these you'll lift the dough up and allow it to stretch downward and then fold it back over itself, repeating that process a total of 4 times around the perimeter of the dough. These coil folds are much more gentle than the stretch and folds, so they're ideal for preserving the airiness in the dough toward the end of bulk fermentation. Now after the 6th set of folds, return the dough to your warm environment for a final 25 minutes. After that 25 minutes, it's time to begin dividing and shaping the dough. So turn out the dough onto a lightly floured surface with the top side down and divide it into 2 equal-sized pieces. Then flip each piece over and use your bench scraper to pre-shape each piece into a taut ball, being careful not to overshape, which could cause the surface to tear. The goal here is just to create some initial tension. So once they're shaped, just dust the loaves with a bit more flour and cover them with a kitchen towel for a 25-minute bench rest. After that 25 minutes, it's time for the final shaping. I like to shape my loaves into petards, so I'm getting out my oval banditons and dusting them with some rice flour to prevent any sticking. I like to use brown rice flour just so my loaves don't end up with a white residue on the surface, but that's all just personal preference. White rice flour will work just fine as well. So to shape the loaves, make sure the floured side is facing down, then start by gently stretching the dough into a wide rectangle like so, then fold the portion of the dough closest to you over the middle. Next, fold the left and right sides over each other in the same way, developing as much tension as possible without tearing the dough. Then grab the 2 corners furthest away from you and fold them in toward the middle. This creates a little thicker portion in the middle of the loaf, which then tapers out toward the edges. So tuck that fold in as you roll the dough over, then tuck again and roll again until you've reached the end of the dough. It also helps to develop a bit more tension by dragging the dough along your work surface a few times with your hands or bench scraper. Finally, just gently place the loaf into the banneton, seam side up. If you notice any seams that haven't fully closed, you can pinch them shut at this point, and even stretch the dough over itself a bit more if you think it could use some more tension. You'll notice that the dough won't be quite as extensible as a non-whole wheat loaf, because the whole wheat flour of course contains the entire grain, so it has a harder time developing gluten. Which is also why whole wheat loaves tend to turn out a bit denser, but since we used a high hydration here paired with plenty of folding, we can still achieve a pretty decent rise. Anyways, if you'd like to shape a boule, the process is pretty similar and I talked about it in my basic sourdough bread recipe, so I'll leave a link to that portion of the video below. Either way, just repeat the shaping process with the second loaf and transfer your bannetons to some sort of food-safe plastic bag or anything else that'll achieve an airtight seal to prevent the dough from drying out. If you use plastic bags, you can obviously reuse them for future loaves if you like. Then transfer those bannetons to your fridge for the final proofing until the loaves spring back slowly when poked, which should take about 6 to 9 hours. It's a bit harder to tell how quickly the loaves spring back when they're in the plastic bags, but you can still get a good idea. Now, for those of you that have seen my previous videos, you know that I'm a big fan of the Dutch oven method for baking. So once the loaves are about an hour away from being ready to bake, go ahead and preheat your oven with a Dutch oven inside to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 260 degrees Celsius. So here we are after about 8 hours of proofing, and my loaves spring back slowly when poked, meaning that they're ready to bake. I've had my oven preheating for about an hour now, so all that's left to do is score the loaves and bake them. So as quickly as possible, remove the bottom of your preheated Dutch oven and flip the loaf onto it. Then score the loaf, making sure to score at an angle to the surface of the loaf for the best possible ear, at about 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep. Then quickly place the lid onto your Dutch oven and throw the loaf into the oven. After 20 minutes, remove the lid from your Dutch oven, and hopefully your loaf has risen nicely by this point. So now just reduce your oven temperature to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 230 degrees Celsius, and allow the loaf to bake for another 15 minutes or until the desired level of browning is achieved. As always, you'll want to wait until the loaf has completely cooled before cutting into it to allow the inside to finish cooking. When you do cut into it, you should be left with a beautifully tender and relatively open crumb bread, which is a far cry from the dense, flavorless loaves that you typically think of when you think of whole wheat bread. As with most sourdough, these will last at least a week on your counter, and you'll even see that the flavor tends to change over time, so they might become slightly more tangy during the next few days after baking. So now that you know how to make whole wheat sourdough bread, be sure to click the video in the bottom right corner of the screen to pick up some tips on how to get a better oven spring. So there you go. I'll see you all in the next one.
Hey,
Video number
welcome
4
back
is
to
from
Six
the
Sister
Six
Stuff.
Sister Stuff
Today I am
YouTube
making
channel.
6 loaves of bread in just 1 hour. So my name is Kristen. I am the second sister from SixSisterStuff.com. Now, if you have been to our channel before and have subscribed but have not pushed that little bell, go ahead and do that now, because that's the only way you'll get our notifications every time that we post to YouTube. So today I'm sharing with you my tips and my tricks on how to make 6 loaves of bread. You heard that right, 6 loaves in just 1 hour. Now my first trick of doing it is you have to get the right kind of yeast, and I'll show you that in a second. The second way of making 6 loaves in 1 hour is by using a Bosch mixer. Now if you've never heard of Bosch before, I've been using a Bosch for about 7 years now. I don't have a KitchenAid because I love my Bosch so much. I can double batch almost everything, whether it's cookies, bread. The Bosch can hold up to 15 pounds of dough at one time. That is a ton of dough, and that is a lot of bread for just one recipe. So now we work with Bosch, usually over at SixSisterStuff.com, but I'm bringing Bosch over to YouTube because I love it that much. So if you go to the link in the description, you can get 20% off our special summer package right now. If you click on that, I'll show you everything that you can get in that summer package. But for now, I'm just gonna show you how to make the 6 loaves of bread in just 1 hour. Now I'm first gonna start off by telling you the kind of wheat that I use. This is called red wheat, and I actually love to grind it myself. You can get it at Bosch also. I've had it for about 5 years, and I love grinding my own wheat. If you don't want to grind your own, you can use wheat flour from the store or just normal white flour. Now the trick to this recipe is using instant yeast. This is the kind of yeast that I buy because I can get it on Amazon for pretty cheap. I'll put a link in the description for you. So we're doing 2 tablespoons of yeast. Then I'm just putting my dough hook on, so I'm ready to go. Okay, next you're going to add 6 cups of warm water. Then you're going to add 2/3 cup of oil. This can be canola oil or vegetable oil. I use vegetable oil because I don't have canola oil right now. Then you're going to add 2/3 cup of honey. This can be your favorite honey from the Honey Bear. That's the one I'm using. Just 2/3 cup, and then pour it right in on top of your yeast and your water. Then you're going to add 2 tablespoons of salt. That will just go right on top. Then on top of that, you're going to add just 6 cups of flour right now. Once you've added all 6 cups, you're going to put your lid on. Make sure it's sealed tightly, or you don't want the flour to explode out of it. You're going to put it on M to make it all nice and smooth. Now, once that's incorporated pretty well, you're going to take the lid off and you're going to add 7 to 8 more cups of flour. At the end, I really didn't count the flour. I'll show you how you can tell when it's all the way done. So right now, I'm just adding 7 more cups of flour. Now my Bosch is starting to fill up. It is looking good. Once you put your flour in, you're going to put the lid on, and this time you're going to go to 1. We're going to let it sit on 1 for a little bit to mix it really well. Now while it's mixing, you're going to take the little lid off, and you're going to start adding a 1/2 cup at a time. By adding just a 1/2 cup of flour at a time, you're not going to be adding too much flour. You just have to watch it. So I'm going to be adding 1/2 at a time. See how it's kind of starting to come off the edges? Now, after you're done putting all of your flour in, it will start wiping the edges pretty clean of the dough. Once it hits that phase, that means you're done adding your flour and you can just let it mix. Okay, look at those edges. See how it's wiped it clean? That means you're done adding flour to your bread dough. Now once you see that, it's time to turn your little knob over to 2, and you're going to let it sit on 2 for about 6 to 8 minutes. The machine is going to do the kneading for you, so you don't even have to get your hands dirty at this point. Now when your 6 to 8 minutes is done, go ahead and turn it to off, and take the lid off. Now I'm going to flour it down on my counter a little bit just so it doesn't stick too bad to my counter. Alright, now it's time to pull all of the dough out of the bowl. I would just dump it out, but it was too heavy to lift up. So I'm getting my hands floured a little bit just so it's easier to spread the dough around. I'm not spreading the dough thin, I'm just making it easier for myself so I can try to evenly cut the dough into loaves. Now if you want to be really technical, you can weigh it and even it out that way, but it's just for my family and neighbors, so it doesn't really matter that much to me. So I'm just gonna eyeball it. Alright, I have 6 loaf pans. They don't match, but that's okay. I sprayed them with non-stick cooking spray just so I don't have to deal with the sticking part. So I'm going to kind of curl under the edges and just stick it right into the bread pan. Now once you're all done putting the bread into the bread pans, you're going to wait about 20 minutes to let it rise so that it doubles in size. The last 10 minutes I like to set my oven. I set it to 350 degrees and now I'm ready to stick the bread right inside of the oven. I did all 6 loaves in the same oven. You're now going to cook the bread for 30 minutes. Now when it's all done, you're going to take it out of the oven and let it cool for just a minute before you take it out of the pans. I didn't have a large enough cooling rack, so I decided to use a rack from my oven, cleaned it down really good, and put my bread on top. It worked perfect for a cooling rack. Alright you guys, that is all I have for you today. If you want to grab a Bosch for yourself that's 20% off, go ahead and click the link in the description and I'll send you to the right place. Alright guys, see you later.
Once
Bye.
again, we would like to thank you for watching our top 4 videos, for how to make your own whole wheat bread and other breads as well. Hit that like button and that subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. Also remember that we have links below in the video description that will take you to the Amazon page that you see here, for fantastic selections of bread makers. And also here, for the Amazon Whole Foods and groceries that you may want delivered to you as well. Hit that like button and that subscribe button for us, here at Odra, Cooking and Fine Wines.